And next up this week, we're joined by Aengus Burns, partner and pension trustee at Grant Thornton. Aengus, thank you and welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Carol. Great to be back.
So Aengus, we spoke to you maybe about a year ago when we were still very much in the height of COVID-19, and really there was a lot of uncertainty about construction and real estate in Ireland. We may be coming out at the tail end of COVID, but a lot of uncertainty still exists. So you might just tell us how your clients at Grant Thornton are perceiving Ireland, the Irish property market.
Yeah, so my main focus, Carol, is probably on residential property at the moment, through acting as a pensioner trustee for small self-administered pensions. These pension structures primarily invest in property, so you're talking kind of 80% of the assets under management are invested in relatively modest value property. So these are SME owners, maybe professionals in practice or managers in industry who are able to build up a bit of cash in the pension and apply it to primarily buy-to-let properties. Okay.
Sorry, can I just get you to clarify there? You talk about relatively modest. What ranges are we talking?
Anywhere from 100 to 400, 500,000 for residential property with or without debt, and for commercial property kind of up to 500,000 up to 2 million, that kind of range. So you really are talking the mom and pops here, the Main Street Ireland, the towns and cities of Ireland. I'm not talking so much PRS, which gets a lot of bandwidth, as you'll know, Carol, but is a very small part of the residential landlord property sector, although it gets an awful lot of noise. I won't talk so much about the commercial property space, the office space. It's not particularly my area, and I would imagine it's extremely complicated at the moment in terms of how that's working out.
Yeah, I will look in terms of PRS. It's small, but it's one of the fastest growing sectors in the residential market. So, and you're right to say it's garnered a lot of attention, but actually I think that's coming from the fact that a decade ago it really wasn't something that the Irish market was familiar with. And I think that there has been a lack of appreciation that our housing crisis is so nuanced that it's across all types and tenures. So actually we need so many different solution providers from
public. Carol, I absolutely agree with you. And I think it's going to be a major part of the residential property investment space, and will continue to grow. And I think there are a number of reasons for that. We know that residential buy-to-let landlords are exiting the sector. Okay, how could that be if these foreign PRS investors are coming in and they are amazed at the yields that are on offer in this country, and the level of stability, the level of demand, and the strength of the sector? How could it be that all these landlords are exiting the market when you have the likes of PRS and perhaps smaller pension investors entering the market? And there's a good number of reasons for that I think present as positives for investors coming in, but clearly there are a number of negatives that are driving those residential property investors out of the market. I would say that the residential landlord sector is probably dominated by amateur landlords, by small landlords. These could be accidental landlords. These could be individuals who have inherited property. Perhaps they bought a property to live in and outgrew it, but maybe through negative equity or otherwise, they're in a situation where have become landlords because they can't effectively sell the property. But for good or for bad, we have a landscape there that is primarily small landlords across the country. much of the much of the country, particularly regional towns and cities, are not attractive to the large PRS landlords. You know, they will only invest really in Dublin, perhaps in Cork. You might see the odd student development in Galway City, but really outside of those regions, the scale is not there. So, you know, these outside investors require scale. They require large sized investments, and they're really not to be had outside of Dublin and the region. So you have a situation where landlords are exiting the market. Why is that? We know that the political climate now is not conducive to landlords. You know, perhaps landlords are held up as being kind of rentiers who live off the work of others without particularly bringing much into the space. They're effectively, I suppose, capitalists versus workers, maybe in some kind of dialogue. What's missed is the requirement for small landlords in the market to provide homes to individuals who might not particularly want to buy a house, might not be in a position to buy a house, or at their stage in life where they're not going to be buying a house. They need a good place to live, and they need availability of rental stock. That kind of political messaging manifests itself probably in two forms. One would be the Residential Tenancy Board, okay, and the restrictions that have come into the market. We have rent pressure zones across much of the country now. So in a situation where we have 8, 9, possibly 10% consumer price inflation, rents are stuck at 2% annually. So effectively, rents are going backwards in value. Okay. Now, I think what really sticks in the craw, perhaps, of the amateur landlords is to hear that, you know, the PRS investors who build new developments are getting these extraordinary rents, and there's no doubt that they are. But for the vast amount of landlord investors in the country, they are capped with rent, so they cannot increase their rent, and the rents are effectively going backwards. So I think, you know, that's one of the issues that kind of sticks in the craw of landlords a bit. Not only do they feel somewhat vilified, that they cannot speak up, certainly underappreciated in terms of the service that they bring to tenants, but also perhaps that they feel the situation is going backwards for them. Anecdotally, we hear that perhaps it will be impossible to remove a tenant from a house, even when you're looking to sell that property. So the value of your property might be caught by the value of the rent that is coming from that property.
And it's two of the words you said there really jump out at me, but for very different reasons. You know, you're talking about landlords being vilified, and that is certainly the case. We're seeing it right across the built environment, from planning to construction, right through to the management and operation of property in Ireland. So there's a cultural element there that certainly got worse from the crash a decade and a half ago. But the other one you mentioned there is underappreciated, and I think you're right. There's an absolute lack of appreciation of the importance and the role that smaller landlords play in serving the Irish market. One of the things we've seen is that large agencies like Sherry Fitzgerald have been warning since 2018, so a long time now. They've been warning about the consistent exodus of small landlords out of the marketplace. And I know you use the word amateur, but I tend to think that there are far fewer accidental landlords. I mean, that was definitely a cohort in the market, but actually, as we've now returned to Celtic Tiger peak prices, I think that that's becoming less of an issue. But we know from the RTB stats that almost 80% of all landlords in Ireland own one or two properties. That doesn't necessarily make them amateurs. Some of them are doing this for decades, but they're certainly what we would term to be smaller landlords in the marketplace. But we know that they're choosing to leave. And but this has been pointed out in the market for a long time, and it's only really in the last 3 years that the government seems to acknowledge that actually we need to find a way to stem the loss of existing landlords out of the market, but also to encourage new smaller landlords into the market. And yet, even though there's been an acknowledgement that this is important from the current and previous government, it hasn't happened. Now, are you expecting any changes in budget 2023 that will actually, if not reverse this, then at least stem the loss of existing landlords out of the market, even if it doesn't go so far as encouraging new ones into it?
Yeah, just to clarify, I suppose, when 80% of landlords have one or two properties, that translates as, perhaps 5 to 10,000 euro per annum of net rents, net profits. That to me is not a professional landlord. So the opposite of professional, I would say, is amateur. I don't mean to be disparaging, but it does mean that people have other things that they are doing in their lives and that they do not need this headache, and to be vilified and to be treated this way when actually they're better things to be doing with their lives, rather than, being this underappreciated landlord. I suppose that's the kind of messaging that we're getting from the ground. The other significant area is taxation. So landlords are, most landlords in the country outside of PRS and outside of pension investors and outside of investors who use corporate structures. So the vast majority of landlords are personal landlords who are impacted at the highest rates of income tax, PRSI and USC. So somewhere between 52 and 55%, for 55% at the highest rate for anything over 100,000, 52% at quite modest levels. And bear in mind that we've said that most landlords, 80% have one or two properties. So they're going to be working somewhere else or receiving some other income. So therefore, the rents are coming in generally at the marginal level, 52%. Add a bit of a debt repayment to that, it means effectively you're subsidizing the situation. I think that's where we're going to see the governmental input this year through the budget is around taxation. I don't understand why the tenant rental credit was removed from the market. I thought it was quite useful for individuals who are renting to be able to get a tax credit against their rents. It also brought more compliance from the tax perspective for landlords, and that it required registration, etc. It was done away with. There is talk of that coming back. That will certainly assist tenants. I'm not sure how it will assist landlords, but I think certainly on the taxation side, we will certainly see the introduction of USC on rents, 8 to 11% on rents, something new. In the last 10 years, we would see a reversal as being absolutely timely. I'm not sure whether there is much noise in that space. There tends to be more noise around linking some kind of tax credits to long-term tenancies, and this seems to be a theme from government that has been getting a lot of airtime in terms of security of tenure. And you can see that on the Residential Tenancies Board side in terms of, inability or reducing inability to remove tenants from houses. But I think we will also see that brought into some kind of a tax relief angle.
Okay. Aengus, with that in mind, just before we wrap up today, how are you advising your clients for 2022 into 2023? Do you know at this stage what's the structured advice for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for we've been quite negative in terms of the down pieces to this. There are plenty upsides to the market at the moment. We've already established that with the external PRS investors. They're coming in, they can't believe the yields in this market. They think it's a fantastic market. So it's about addressing the issues around the Residential Tenancies Board and taxation in particular. So with regard to the Residential Tenancies Board, would be huge fans of engaging professional property managers to take the headache, to take the stress, to take the vilification away from landlords. I think that's really important. Regulation has moved on hugely in this space, and it is very hard for somebody managing 1 or 2 properties to keep up to speed with the requirements in that sector. I think that's number one, and the value that can be brought by property managers, professional property managers, is immense. With regard to taxation, 52, 55% really makes it prohibitive to be in this space, particularly where rents are capped. So in that respect, we would say that structures are important. So whether it's a corporate structure or a pension structure that mitigates the impact of tax on rental income and property price growth, we think that is very, very important, because we do not believe it is possible to operate a professional landlord business with the current income tax rates. So they're the 2 areas of focus that we would look at.
Super, thank you, Aengus. And if you're willing, perhaps we could have a chat on air again later this month, after the details of Budget 2023 have been released. So there's a bit more meat on the bone, and we know what your clients and indeed investors across the Irish property market are likely to be facing. For now, that's all we've time for today. My thanks to Aengus Burns, partner and pension trustee at Grant Thornton. And that's it from us this week. You can get in touch with the show on social media at iProperty Radio, or by emailing hello@ipropertyradio.com. My thanks to the Hear Me Roar production team and to Luke Delaney on sound for Dublin South FM. Until next time, thank you for listening.